But there is a reality that the wealth of most of the world is in a very few hands. And that there is a reality that all of us have bought into a system of the haves and the have-nots. That we've all bought into. Now, it's difficult for us sometimes to actually change the systems of the world, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't examine them. And it doesn't mean that we should confront them when the systems of the world ensure that there are some who are extremely wealthy and some who have absolutely nothing. You know, it always concerns me when I see the amount of greed that goes on in countries that are wealthy. And the places where the countries where there is very little, that we seem to be hoarding so much of it and keeping so much of it to ourselves. Now, having said that, it's also important to realize that the folks that sometimes have all of it don't want to share it with other people. And sometimes they don't even want to share it with us, even those of us who are part of the system and part of the countries that are wealthy. You know, I've recently been following this whole interest, I guess, within the United States of having a universal healthcare system. And I don't want to get too political this morning, but the fact of the matter is that there is absolutely no reason why we can't have a universal healthcare system in the United States of America. I mean, there's absolutely no reason. It scares me sometimes to hear some of the reasons why some people believe that we shouldn't have a universal healthcare system. But I have to understand that there is a reason why they continue to put up barriers to that universal healthcare system, is because they have an investiture in continuing to have the greed on one side. And they always have an investiture in making sure that some folks go without necessary health care. I don't get it. I mean, I understand that they want to keep it all, when I say they, I mean the systems want to keep it all to themselves. But the reality is that a lot of people have got very rich on the cost of health care in the United States of America. It's absolutely true. You know, I come from a little country, Great Britain. We used to be great. We're now just called Britain. And if you watch BBC America, we're sometimes called Little Britain. But, you know, we're a little country. But, you know, Great Britain has universal health care. And, you know, I benefited from that universal health care as a kid growing up and, you know, paying into the national health insurance. And I want to tell you, paying into the national health insurance in the United Kingdom is nothing like paying into the health system that we have here in the United States of America. I can quite understand why so many people find it unaffordable to be able to buy into the healthcare system that we have here. You know, some of you realize or know that just a year ago I had a bicycle accident. And I have to now say it was a bicycle accident, because I used to say it was a bike accident, and everyone thought I was being really butch and it was a motorbike. Oh, nobody thought I was really butch and it was a motorbike. Damn. But, you know, but it was a bicycle. I now have one with stabilizers so that I can't fall off of it. It's very pretty, it's got little pink handles, anyway, it doesn't really matter. But, you know, I fell off, and, you know, having surgery and having to go to the hospital, and, you know, they send you the bills that, theoretically you would have had to have paid if you weren't covered by insurance. And I'm one of the lucky ones. You know, I get benefits with my job as a pastor here in this church. But I've added up those bills, and my elbow is up to over $100,000 for that health provision. I mean, I can't imagine what it would have been like if I didn't have health coverage. And I can't imagine what it must be like for many, many people who don't have health coverage, or many, many people in our own community who have exceeded the limits of health coverage and who now are being denied coverage on the basic needs of their own lives and are just having to go into debt after debt after debt of being able to afford to keep themselves healthy. So I'm going to just be honest, I'm a big advocate of universal health care. And I believe it's achievable. But in order for it to be achievable, there are some people who are going to have to give up their wealth that they have, laundered and made a part of their own lives. And I'm not sure that there are people who want to do that, because people get very comfortable in those situations. That's greed. I mean, that's just pure and basic. That's greed. There are others of us who hoard all sorts of things in our lives. We can talk about big corporations, but what about ourselves? What are the things that we store up here on earth? When Scripture tells us that we shouldn't store up these things on earth, we should store up our treasure in heaven. And what Scripture is calling us to, I don't think that means that we shouldn't invest in 401ks or, in our retirement and all those sorts of things. I don't think that's what Scripture is saying. But I think Scripture is challenging us to think about what it is about our own lives that we've stored up here that we are not sharing with others. What is it that we are doing to signify that we are greedy, or that we have tendencies not to share with others in the same way that I think Jesus calls us to as disciples of Christ, sharing what we have with one another? I truly believe that Jesus was, he was more than someone who was about fair trade. Jesus was, in many, many ways, a communist. Now, I know that that's struggles for those of us in the West. But the reality is, if you really read Scripture, what Jesus tells his disciples is that they should pool all of their resources together, bring everything into the barn, and from that place, distribute it fairly among the peoples. Now, I'm also a believer that communism doesn't work, because always someone has to be on top. But the reality is that the purest of that kind of sharing of wealth, Jesus was certainly a philosopher and certainly a spiritual teacher that talked more about sharing than about keeping everything to ourselves. Right. Jesus talked about the generous spirit, about living from that place of generosity. And living from that place of generosity. One of my favorite musicals, and I'm hoping later on in the year is to preach a series of sermons on this, but my favorite musical is Avenue Q. Now, some of you may have seen it, some of you may not have, some of you may have heard the music from Avenue Q. There's some stuff in there that we perhaps couldn't play in church. In fact, there's a lot from Avenue Q that we probably couldn't play in church. But one of the sentiments from Avenue Q is this sense of generosity, is this sense of sharing, is the sense of realizing that we really are all in the same boat, and that in that notion of being together in community, we are called to live out from a place of generosity, a generous spirit that lives not from selfishness, but lives from sharing and giving. Where are those places that we've neglected to share? What are the things that we have neglected to offer to one another? Only you can answer that question for yourself, and I answer it for myself. I think about, in my own life, what are the things that I don't share? What are the things that I hoard in my own spirit? What are the things that I am greedy for? And what is it that this period of Lent, a period of Lent is a time of reflecting on the temptations that face Jesus and the temptations that face us. So what is it that I am being tempted to be greedy about? What are the things that you are tempted to hoard for yourself, to build up treasure here on earth rather than in heaven? What is it that we are doing that perhaps we need to change? And perhaps Lent is a time for us to make those changes, to make them in such a way that they become less a prominent part of our lives, so that we can truly be that generous spirit, we can truly be that generous community. What is it that we could give up today? What is it that we could share today? Perhaps it's making a sandwich for the homeless, or for someone less fortunate than ourselves.